The grand Thornfield Concert Hall shimmered under golden lights, humming with quiet anticipation. On the vast stage, 38-year-old Marcus Chen gave the final polish to the brass railings, his reflection glinting in the metal. Dressed in his olive-green janitor's uniform, he moved with practiced precision, a small figure amid the luxury of velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers. To most who would soon arrive, and the city's richest, dressed in gowns and tuxedos, Marcus was invisible. Just the man with the mop. For 2 years, he'd worked these halls, cleaning after galas, symphonies, and award nights. It wasn't the dream he once had, not even close. But it let him do what mattered most: pick up his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, from school every afternoon, cook her dinner, and tuck her in with bedtime stories before his late shift began. That quiet life was his rhythm now. Steady, honest, and humble. Tonight, though, Thornfield was dressed for its biggest event of the year, the annual Foundation Gala. The city's elite would soon flood the hall: billionaires, celebrities, and the kind of people who made headlines with a single donation. Marcus wiped a final fingerprint off the Steinway grand piano at center stage, its jet-black surface gleaming like a mirror, and paused. The sight stirred something deep inside him, a forgotten ache. Once upon a time, he'd dreamed of sitting at a piano like this, not cleaning around it. Almost finished there, Marcus? The commanding voice pulled him back. It was James Wellington, the 52-year-old CEO of Wellington Industries, the man who practically owned the place. His tuxedo was flawless, his gold watch catching the light like a badge of power. "Yes, sir." "Everything's ready for tonight," Marcus said, stepping aside. Wellington nodded curtly. "Good. The Maestro will be here soon for his sound check." As he spoke, the hall began to fill with board members and high-profile donors. Marcus recognized most of them: titans of industry, art patrons, familiar faces from magazines, people who never noticed the janitor quietly sweeping in the background. But tonight, something about the air felt different, the kind of stillness that comes right before. The air inside Thornfield grew heavier as more guests arrived: celebrated artists, CEOs, and high society figures, the kind whose names appeared in glossy magazines and charity columns. Laughter echoed under the crystal chandeliers. Champagne glasses clinked, and Marcus quietly continued wiping the last smudge off the piano's glossy lid. "You know, Marcus," said James Wellington, his tone dripping with polite curiosity. He nodded toward the grand piano. "I've always wondered if any of our staff hide musical talents. Do you play at all?" Marcus froze for a second, his heart skipping. "A little, sir," he said softly. "Nothing professional?" Wellington's eyebrows lifted with mock intrigue. "Really? What kind of things can you play?" Before Marcus could answer, Wellington turned to face the elegantly dressed crowd now mingling across the hall. His voice boomed through the perfect acoustics. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his words carrying a theatrical edge, "it seems our very own custodial staff member Marcus here claims to have some piano skills. What do you say we get a little preview before the real show begins?" The audience stirred with amused curiosity. Polite chuckles, whispers, and the faint sound of champagne glasses tapping. Marcus felt a cold wave roll through his stomach. He realized instantly that Wellington wasn't being kind. This wasn't admiration. It was a spectacle. "Mr. Wellington," Marcus said quietly, almost pleading, "I don't think that would be appropriate. I'm here to work, not perform." "Nonsense," Wellington said, waving his hand dismissively, clearly enjoying himself. "It's a gala, Marcus. Everyone contributes in their own way. Besides," he smirked, turning to the crowd, "how often do we get to hear what our janitorial staff can do with a $2 million piano?" Laughter rippled through the hall, light and polite, but cruel all the same. Several guests pulled out their phones, eager to record the moment. Marcus stood still, his palms sweating. To them, he wasn't a man. He was a curiosity, a sideshow. The janitor with the broom who dared touch the Steinway. He looked at the faces in front of him, polished smiles, condescending eyes, and something in him hardened. The fear began to melt, replaced by a quiet resolve. They didn't know him. They didn't know the life he'd given up, or the music he once lived for. Marcus slowly turned toward the piano. His voice was calm now, though his heart pounded in his chest. "What would you like me to play?" Wellington's grin widened. "Surprise us." And with that, Marcus took a slow breath and sat down at the piano. "Play whatever you think will impress this distinguished crowd," Wellington said, his grin sharp and self-satisfied. Marcus took a slow, steady breath. With his cleaning cloth still in hand, he walked toward the piano. Every step echoed softly against the polished floor. When he reached the bench, he folded the cloth neatly and set it aside, a quiet symbol of the man they thought he was. Then, with movements that seemed muscle-deep and automatic, he adjusted the bench, straightened his back, and placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, he just sat there, still as a statue. The crowd murmured, expecting something clumsy, maybe even funny. But Marcus wasn't hearing them. He was somewhere else, back in time, before life had forced him to trade concert halls for cleaning supplies. Then, softly, he began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opart 9, number 2 drifted into the air, gentle, haunting, pure. The melody shimmered like moonlight, wrapping around the velvet seats and golden balconies. One by one, the conversation stopped. The laughter faded. The room changed. Marcus's hands moved with a kind of effortless grace, fingers gliding, dancing, caressing each note with precision and emotion that only years of devotion could create. This wasn't a janitor fumbling with a tune. This was a musician, an artist who had once lived and breathed this music before the world demanded something else from him. As the piece unfolded, the hall fell utterly silent. The faces that moments ago had smirked in amusement now stared in awe. Eyes widened. Glasses of champagne hung frozen mid-air. The sound was too beautiful, too human, too filled with longing to be anything less than extraordinary. For Marcus, time disappeared. He wasn't in a janitor's uniform anymore, and he was home, back in the years before tragedy struck. Before that night, 4 years ago, when a car crash took his wife and shattered the life they'd built. He had stopped performing then, traded music for a steady paycheck, traded dreams for the certainty his daughter, Emma, needed. Now, for the first time since then, the music had found him again. Wellington stood at the side of the stage, frozen. His smug amusement had vanished. He wasn't just surprised, he was shaken. The effortless control, the emotional depth, the artistry pouring from Marcus's fingers, it wasn't a hidden hobby. It was mastery. He realized, with a quiet unease, that he wasn't watching a janitor at all. He was witnessing something rare, something unforgettable. The last note hung in the air like a whisper from another world, trembling, perfect, alive. Then came silence, a deep, awestruck silence that filled the grand Thornfield Hall. No one moved. No one dared to speak. It was as if the entire audience feared that even a breath might break the fragile magic still floating in the room. And then, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was Wellington. Slow at first, deliberate, then faster, stronger. The applause spread like a spark through dry wood, and in seconds the hall erupted. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even whistling, their polished sophistication forgotten. The sound echoed through the vaulted ceiling, real and raw, not polite, not forced, but full of wonder. Marcus stood from the bench, his chest rising and falling, his face flushed with emotion. For years he had hidden this part of himself. Now, in this very hall where he had mopped floors and polished brass, he had finally been seen. "Marcus," Wellington said, stepping onto the stage. His earlier arrogance replaced by something unfamiliar, humility. That was extraordinary. Truly. "Where on earth did you learn to play like that?" Marcus smiled faintly, his voice calm but heavy with memory. "I graduated from the New England Conservatory 12 years ago," he said. "I was building a career as a concert pianist when my wife passed away. After that, I became a single father. I needed steady hours, something reliable. So, I took this job. It let me take care of my daughter." A ripple of quiet murmurs moved through the audience, not gossip this time, but empathy. For once, these powerful people understood what they were hearing. They'd all faced choices, sacrifices, though few had ever given up their dreams to survive. Wellington looked at Marcus, his expression softening with genuine respect. "I have to ask," he said gently, "why didn't you ever mention your background? We host dozens of events here every year. We could have used someone with your kind of talent." Marcus turned his gaze out toward the crowd. Rows of glittering jewelry, tuxedos, and curious faces. Then slowly he looked back at Wellington, his eyes steady. "Mr. Wellington," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady but full of unspoken weight. "When you're raising a young child on a janitor's salary, you don't think about being noticed. You think about keeping your job, showing up, doing your best. I never wanted anyone to believe I wasn't serious about my work here." Wellington nodded slowly, the truth of Marcus's words sinking in. For the first time that evening, the powerful CEO looked human. "I understand," he said after a pause. "But Marcus, would you consider playing one more piece?" "Something of your own choosing?" Marcus hesitated, then gave a faint nod. He sat back down at the piano, his fingers hovering above the keys. This time, when he began to play, the melody was softer, more intimate. It was Bach's Air on the G string. The notes floated through the hall like whispers of memory, gentle, sorrowful, and pure. Marcus closed his eyes as he played, and his thoughts went to Emma, his daughter, likely at home with Mrs. Patterson, finishing her homework, waiting to hear about Daddy's day. This had been her lullaby when she was little, the song that soothed her to sleep after the nights she cried for her mother. As the music filled the grand hall, something shifted again. The applause and chatter of moments ago faded into silence. The melody touched something deep, even in hearts that thought themselves untouchable. Wellington stood in the front row, his chest tight. He thought of his own children, grown, successful, and distant. He had given them everything money could buy, yet somehow lost pieces of them along the way. Across the hall, a woman dabbed at her eyes. A man near the aisle lowered his phone, forgetting to record. The audience wasn't just listening, they were feeling. Each note carried love, loss, sacrifice, all the invisible weight people carry in silence. When the final chord faded, Marcus looked up to see the crowd, not clapping yet, not breathing, just absorbing. Then Wellington stepped onto the stage, his voice breaking the stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone filled with awe, "I think we've just witnessed something remarkable. We came here tonight to celebrate music and support the arts. But instead, we discovered that one of the most gifted musicians in our city has been among us all along. Unseen." The room erupted in applause again, but this time, it wasn't just admiration. It was respect. Wellington turned to Marcus, emotion clear in his voice. "Marcus, I'd like to make you an offer. The Thornfield Foundation will establish a scholarship fund, one that ensures you can return to performing while providing financial stability for you and your daughter. You shouldn't have to choose between your art and your family." Marcus felt his throat tighten, tears stinging his eyes. The offer was more than an opportunity. It was a second chance. A chance to reclaim the life he'd once dreamed of, without giving up the reason he'd stopped chasing it. "Mr. Wellington," he whispered, his voice trembling. "That's incredibly generous." 6 months later, the stage lights glowed across Marcus's face once more. But this time, not as a janitor cleaning up after a performance. Now, he was the performer. He played alongside the City Symphony Orchestra, his hands dancing across the grand piano with confidence and grace. He gave solo recitals at Thornfield Hall, each performance filling the room with beauty and quiet power. And in the front row, as always, sat Emma, a 7-year-old with a proud, glowing smile that never faded through an entire concert. When people asked who her father was, she'd straighten up and say, "That's my daddy. He's the best piano player in the world." Not because he played in concert halls, or because the papers now called him the janitor who became a maestro, but because she knew, in her small but certain heart, that her father had once given up everything for her, and then found a way to reclaim his dream without ever letting her down. Wellington kept a photograph on his office wall, taken that first night. It showed Marcus seated at the piano in his olive-green custodial uniform, eyes closed, lost in the music. He looked at it often. It reminded him, and everyone who entered his office, that extraordinary people are everywhere, often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to look beyond the surface and recognize the brilliance within. And for Marcus, the lesson of that night stayed with him forever, that true worth isn't measured by titles, salaries, or status, but by the love we give, the courage to be seen, and the grace to share our true selves with the world.